PALZ shows Europe as it really is. Hello and welcome to Vox Civica, where democracy has a voice. I'm Giorgos Karagiorgos, journalist and correspondent for the European Youth Press, and part of the editorial team behind PALZ, our youth-led platform for in-depth journalism and civic storytelling across Europe and beyond. Today, we have with us Kleo Alexopoulou, an economic and social historian specializing in the Global South. She is currently a visiting professor at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and over the past years has been a postdoctoral scholar at the Princeton Institute for International and Regional Studies. Her research explores colonial state formation, fiscal regimes, labor and welfare development in peripheral contexts. In parallel, she serves on the steering committee of the Global Sumud Flotilla. In this episode, we sit down with her to explore what liberation and self-determination truly mean for Palestine today, politically, legally, and emotionally. From decolonial theory and the politics of recognition to the lived experience of detention after the Gaza flotilla mission, Kleo takes us from the frameworks of international law to the visceral reality of confronting Israeli military force near the source of Gaza. Stay with us. This is a conversation about resistance, memory, and the urgent meaning of justice. Let's dive in. Kleo, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, first of all.
You're perhaps the most appropriate person to ask this question, and allow me to begin with a more theoretical one. From a theoretical point of view, as I said, what does liberation or a right to self-determination mean in the context of a colonial or settler, I would say, regime, and how do these concepts translate in the case of Palestine today?
Yes, so in decolonial theory, liberation refers to the process through which a community frees itself from structures of domination, as we can imagine, especially those imposed by external factors, settler powers, for example. It's not just about political independence, though, but about overcoming the colonial control in every aspect, so economic, cultural, epistemic, and psychological. So please remember thinkers such as Frantz Fanon, well known for the work The Wretched of the Earth. So they viewed liberation as both a political and existential process, so reclaiming humanity through the act of resistance in a way. And also another very important thinker, Amilcar Cabral, if you remember him from the anti-colonial struggle in Cabo Verde, in former Portuguese colonies, and Guinea-Bissau, described liberation as the restoration of the historical personality of a people. So liberation signifies the creation of autonomous structures that reflect, of course, the colonized people's own cultural values and political will. So in that sense, it's a broader term in my eyes compared to the right to self-determination. So the right to self-determination is a principle in international law, an article in the United Nations Charter, and several other General Assembly resolutions, for example, the ones in 1960s on decolonization. In short, the right to self-determination establishes that all people have the right to freely determine their political status and pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. So in colonial context, this means that colonized peoples have the right to end foreign domination and establish their own sovereign institutions. Importantly, this right belongs to peoples, not just states, so it's collective rather than individual. Palestinian liberation means ending all structures of domination that stem from the Zionist settler colonial project, so including military occupation, displacement, segregation, and the denial of the right of return for the refugees. So this goes beyond establishing a nominal state in part of historic Palestine. Liberation involves reclaiming political, territorial, and narrative agency from a regime that has dispossessed Palestinians since 1948, at least since the Nakba. So liberation, to conclude, in this view entails decolonization, not merely statehood. Legally, the United Nations affirm that Palestinians are a people with this right. In practice, this means They have the right to decide their political future and form of governance, but the obstacle in the current reality is that the territory is under de facto annexation controlled by Israel, so making genuine self determination impossible under occupation. In short, if occupation doesn't end, they cannot really materialize the right to self determination and, of course, achieve liberation.
Well, although it's not only political, that brings us naturally to the political dimension. And sticking to this, Palestine is recognized by 157 countries, while Israel is recognized by approximately 163. But, for many Western governments, recognition remains, if I may say, conditional. While at the same time, Hamas is considered a red flag for almost every state. And while the release of Marwan Barghouti, definitely a symbol of unity and peace for Palestine, is not exactly supported as a viable peace approach, and in fact is not really promoted by anyone. Where I drive this is, how do you interpret this contradiction? Is it just a diplomatic hypocrisy, or a structural symptom of a colonial regime where even peace is filtered through, who is considered an acceptable interlocutor, especially when one considers that Israel was almost recognized by the UN on the condition that it respects its resolutions?
Yes, this is a very good question, actually. In the diplomatic realm, Western states often use the language of peace, in quote marks, and stability. Either they talk about a two-state solution or a single binational state, in both cases, is largely a performance of neutrality that masks material and geopolitical interests served by the existing hierarchy. What I mean is that recognition of Palestine by 157 states, as you mentioned, contrasts sharply with the conditionality. Let me use this term that has often been used also for memoranda introduced by the IMF and the European Commission while signed by Greek governments. So contrasts sharply with the conditionality maintained by many Western governments. That is, Palestinian statehood will be recognized only when Israel agrees. So this means that the colonizer holds veto power over the colonized, either directly or indirectly via the United States, actually, in general assemblies. So that's what makes it hypocritical. So Israel's admission to the United Nations in 1949 was conditional on complying with United Nations resolutions, including the right of return for Palestinian refugees, as we mentioned before. Those conditions were never met in practice, yet Israel's membership was never questioned. On the other hand, Palestine is told that its right to statehood depends on proving its commitment to peace. So a moral test that the colonizer never had to pass, actually. So yes, this is diplomatic hypocrisy, in my opinion. The discourse of legality and human rights is applied selectively to the oppressed, not to the oppressor. But this is also a structural symptom of colonial power. So colonial regimes always defined who counts as a legitimate speaker. Those who resist too forcefully are demonized as terrorists. Us as well, in that case, the activists. Remember the shift in the agenda, like in the propaganda, by Israel, that initially we, the activists, were just people who wanted to make a sea cruise, enjoying ourselves in the Mediterranean Sea, while suddenly we became terrorists and we had to be, driven to a jail, under severe restrictions. So this is a good example. And those who represent genuine popular legitimacy, like Barghouti, for example, Barghouti are marginalized because they cannot be easily controlled. Only those who align with the colonial order's terms, they are considered moderate, cooperative, non-threatening, are invited to the table. So in settler colonial structures, peace is not neutral. It functions as a means of managing resistance, not ending domination. So under this logic, it means pacification, not liberation. And this term pacification was used broadly at the end of the 19th century, even since the mid 19th century. Pacification campaigns were called basically the campaigns of occupying territories in Africa. So it's the same term. Take into consideration another example from colonial Africa, a specific example. The Mau Mau rebellion was denounced as savage and barbaric, and only after military defeat, Britain negotiated with moderates, suddenly they became moderates, like Kenyatta, the leader, who had been imprisoned before as a terrorist. This shows structural element of colonial power.
Kleo, I believe that your answer gives definitely also historical and political depth to this issue. I would like now to move from the political sphere to your own experience on the ground. You mentioned it. You have actually been part of two of the most significant solidarity actions. You were part of and led two of these initiatives, the March to Gaza and the Global Sumud Flotilla. Actions that, in my opinion, were among the most powerful cross-border activist movements of recent years. They gave new life to public debate, mobilized solidarity networks, and made the genocide in Palestine even more visible. So, can you take us through this experience? How were they organized in practice? What was the atmosphere among the participants? And finally, for you, what did these journeys symbolize? Were they more a political act or a humanitarian mission?
Yes, here I will respond more freely because, of course, it has to do also with the subjective perception of this experience. But I think it's common, let's say, knowledge. We agree on this, the majority of the participants, that we started more as a humanitarian initiative. And we ended up more as a political activist group, let's say. Group is a small word to describe the international, let's say, network of these people who helped both on the ground and in the sea. I mean, in both missions, when we started the preparations for the trip via Egypt to approach the borders with Rafah, then on the media, we were repeating that we are a humanitarian mission because it was important for us that the broader audience would understand that we are a non-violence movement, a peaceful movement, and we do not, let's say, exclude people based on political beliefs, on religion, or on cultural values, etc. So we wanted to be as open as possible. But gradually, it was obvious, I think, to everybody that this is not a neutral, let's say, humanitarian mission. By definition, it's a political act. The fact that people or grassroots movement members decided to travel to Egypt and try to reach the borders so they can pressure the governments, not only the Egyptian government, of course, all governments, and Israel most of all, to open the borders and receive the humanitarian aid that was already accumulated there. I mean, hundreds of trucks were there. So this made it explicit that this is a political action, and we didn't even transfer, let's say, food or medication as we did with the boats. So we didn't even have this because it was already there. It was already there, and only political pressure was needed to be able to cross, let's say, and reach Palestinian people and children who were starving. So during the second phase of preparations for the Global Sumud Flotilla, the difference there is that we broadened, let's say, the network. We had a coalition. We formed a coalition with people, partners from FFC, from Freedom Flotilla Coalition, who were actually responsible for previous missions, boat missions like Conscience, Madeleine, Handala. And also we made a coalition with people from Sumud. Sumud was this, you remember, the movement from Maghreb countries, from North Africa, who tried to reach as well Palestine, and specifically Gaza. So we joined forces, and then it was clear to us that we must act as political activists and not so much as, let's say, NGO employees. even if some people, of course, were working for NGOs. Because only as an activist you can risk so much, to be honest, and you can take responsibility for yourself and your delegation. I mean, if you act like an employee in the sense that you expect things to be ready for you, to be prepared for you by somebody, by an organization, an invisible organization, then it won't succeed. It was clear to us afterwards that we had to take agency in a way. And the atmosphere, that I forgot, among the participants. So, especially in the Greek delegation, we had quite good relationships with each other because we knew each other from before. Most people had participated also in the first mission via Egypt. So that made us more resilient, to be honest, and more cheerful even. They couldn't break our morale, as I say in Greek. I hope it's correct in English as well.
Well, Kleo, I find your participation in this cause is truly inspiring and full of hope. But what difficulties did you encounter along the way? The March to Gaza mission ultimately stopped in Egypt and did not manage to reach Palestine territory, while the Global Sumud Flotilla was violently intercepted by Israeli forces in international waters. Something that for many people was, something that was debatable. Take us through that journey. What was the trip like until you realized you wouldn't make it? What did you expect to happen then? What was the atmosphere like on the ship? The communication between the participants and finally the transition from anticipation to the tension of the hijacking?
Of course, there were different risks at different stages. We expected most of them. In both cases, we knew that most probably we will not reach Gaza. So that was the most probable scenario. So at first, we were afraid of bureaucratic sabotage, as we call it. So first, you need, as a delegation, to avoid this and be able to leave your country. It's the first step. If you manage to leave on time, for example, in Tunisia, they had this type of problems with the government taking permission for fish boats, etc. And we don't know exactly whether this is only about technical, risks, or actually, technical problems in the boats, or actually there is a political reason that they are stopped or they are delayed even. So this is the first step. Then the other scenarios where either, of course, we are stopped as it happened, like by Israeli forces illegally in international waters, or we would be attacked as it partially happened by drones. So it happened two times while boats were stopped in Tunisia and then close to Creta. So both times certain boats had to face technical problems because of the drones attack, but fortunately we didn't have any deaths. I mean, nobody was severely injured, etc. So these are the risks, and of course the fourth scenario would be to reach Gaza. And you have to be ready to deliver the humanitarian aid, to distribute the food and the medication, which is not easy to a starving population. But we were very happy to know that people from the municipality of Gaza had already formed a committee to receive us and had even prepared tents on the coast for us to sleep. And children were waiting for us. They were waiting for a small gift or something. We knew that through videos that we watched. The same way that also trade unions had invited us in Rafah during the first trip in June. Trade unions had invited us officially, like to be part of this mission. And it was, as you know, it was not only the food and the medication. It was the cause was also moral, like to make them feel heard, to make them feel not alone in this world, so that they have some allies in their struggle for liberation. So these are the risk scenarios. What in reality happened is that we approached much closer than we thought. So the Greek boats, especially Oxygono, for example, I was part of Oxygono, was 40 miles from Gaza coast. So like let's say, better than Madeline or Handala or other missions before. And the new, of course, element. Historically very important was that we were a fleet. We were not anymore one big boat or two big boats. We were like more than 40 boats. So the risk then is how they will actually hijack, how they will hijack us. We thought, because of news coming from Israel, in newspapers or on the TV, that there would be a floated prison, like collecting us, like that there would be a big boat collecting people from the small sailing boats or motorboats, and then they would take us to the prison. What happened in reality is that they occupied our boats, and actually our captains and we participants had to basically, or the organizers, we had to help them also, even drive them, because they were not very well trained. I mean, for sailing boats at least. So we had to be transferred to Asdod, to the port. So there, I would say that the difficult moment was that we could hear the bombs from the coast in Gaza. So I remember this very intensively, let's say, and yeah. And we knew we cannot reach the coast, but we knew also at the same time that there was already a political success, because back home, like in Italy, for example, the trade unions had mobilized so many people. In Barcelona, instead of 70,000 people, for example, on the streets for the Palestinian cause, were suddenly 300,000. So the impact was already big in our eyes. So we were at least happy or satisfied about that.
Following that moment, what came next was detention, a completely different kind of struggle. I would like to go there for a moment and ask you, what were the overall conditions of detention like until your release? You have spoken publicly, for example, also about certain moments in prison that gave you hope. I don't want to spoil them here, but it would be nice if you could share them with us.
We try to avoid talking too much about detention conditions, because we did at the beginning. We thought it's our duty actually to do so, to inform people back home. However, the comparison with the conditions, the detention conditions for Palestinians, is so, it happens unconsciously. And instead of helping, making people realize how Palestinians are treated, maybe we actually drive the attention from them, let's say, withdraw the attention from them. So I would like to be brief on this question, just to mention that they didn't provide us the medication we needed. So some people were sick, were ill, either severely or less. And they didn't receive their medication, although we were promised so, that there would be a doctor in the prison, etc. I doubt that this was a doctor, first of all. I think they were not doctors. It was really like a fake practice room, how to say it, like theater, like playing theater. Anyway, that's important, because, for example, in our cell number 11 in the women's prison, there was a girl, a woman who had iron deficiency. So a simple thing, but it can be aggravated if you don't get the tablets you need. So we constantly demanded for medication and clean water, because there was no clean water in the cells. We had to drink from the toilet, basically. So these were the two most important things, I would say. Of course, they tried in many ways to break, as I said before, like the morale, like to harm you psychologically. So they didn't. Most of people were not harmed physically, only a few cases. But in the case of psychological war, let's say, I think they lost. I think we won. So, I mean, the conditions were not experienced by us so bad, because, of course, there were only 5 days. If we were kept there for months, maybe I would say something different. Maybe we would resemble more to the cases of Palestinians. But yeah, in our case, I would say there were many moments, as you mentioned, that kept us high, kept our spirit high. So one of them is that. Every time we felt that we cannot resist in other ways, we were singing or like even whistling Bella Ciao and other songs, other resistance songs. Also, there was a lot of creativity going on, especially in the women's prison. I saw many women who basically found just a nail, they found something in the room and they used it to cut and sew clothes, like the clothes of the prison. They transformed them, like instead of having, for example, a blindfolder, because many women were blindfolded in the car, in the bus that transferred us to the prison. So they used this piece of textile to create things for the hair, things like that. And this maybe seems silly, but it's not silly. This is anthropologically very important in every prison. I mean, in every detention center. Also in the Nazi concentration camps, because my grandfather was a hostage there. I know stories how important it is to find creative ways to survive. And also strengthen the bonds between people, like between women in that case. That's the most important moment, maybe. And another one is the souvenirs, in quote marks, of Palestinians found in small holes. In the walls, like in the walls. Rima, for example, Hassan, a Euro parliamentarian from France, had found a beautiful medallion and had certain fragments written on it in Arabic, and she was trying to translate them. So it was about love, the specific one. So they hide these things. It's like the need of people, to make their story heard by other people. And that shows also the historical continuity, of course. It shows the deep roots of the Palestinian, let's say, question of the Palestinian struggle and the consequences of it on human bodies, basically. So it shows this continuity from the past to the present and to the future.
Now, stepping back to the broader picture, how do you view the international community's stance on what is happening in Palestine today, especially after the so-called peace agreement of the Trump era? With the ceasefire already having collapsed in practice, do you believe there is a real prospect for justice with meaningful international condemnation of those responsible for war crimes and the genocide? Or do you fear that impunity has become like a permanent feature of international politics?
Yes, I'm afraid that impunity is not maybe a permanent feature of international politics, but it has become a persisting feature concerning the Palestinian struggle. I believe there is, of course, real prospect for peace. First of all, justice is a more complicated cause. There is a real prospect, always there is, under the condition that certain terms are met, and they are met and respected, especially by the oppressor, by Israel, not solely by Palestine. Either we talk about the PLO, or we talk about Fatah in the 80s, or we talk about the Hamas after the 2000s. Regardless the specific political subject that we'll negotiate, it's very important that first of all settlements stop. If they don't stop, you cannot. If the entity is not even stable for a moment, constantly on the move, in a constant expansion, then how? Who is actually negotiating? Like, what is the entity that is negotiating? The settlements, the displacement, the forced displacement by people, which was almost complete before the ceasefire. They wanted to get rid of all Palestinians from Gaza, to evacuate actually the area. And now I would like also to mention something very important from the prison that has to do with what we are talking now. The symbol in the prison the biggest symbol they had on the walls of the women's prison was Gaza destroyed. Imagine a destroyed city in a huge poster, and written below or above, I don't remember anymore, in Arabic. So people of Arabic origin translated for us. The new Gaza. So their vision about Gaza is the complete distraction, not even the Riviera that Donald Trump is imagining. It's a step, how to say it, beyond, let's say, a step of pure distraction. So if a state has this as a national emblem, as a national symbol, because also there was the Israeli flag, and above a guard who was watching, supervise, the whole of the prison. So according to Foucault's terms, to Michel Foucault's terms, like the surveillance, like the panopticon, basically, it was like a panopticon with this symbol at the center. So if they don't stop, reproduce not only the settler, let's say, practices, but also the narratives about expansion at school, at the elementary schools, students and students in the high school, and also even at the university. I'm afraid they learn only how to reproduce this hierarchy, this oppression. So only when all this stop, and also, of course, the famine. I mean, the illegal naval blockade stops, so Palestine can freely communicate with other regions and receive people from other Mediterranean regions and from all over the world, then there is no peace. I mean, there is no peace without justice. Not just because it's because we say so, because it's a historical slogan, let's say, in the protests, but because it's proven. It's proved over time, de facto, like it cannot work if these terms are not met.
As we come to the end, I would like us to look ahead a little. Take a moment and think about what comes next. How do you envision the next decade for Palestine? And also, would you like listeners to take away from this discussion? If someone, for example, finishes the episode and sits with it for a while, what do you like them to be left with to think about?
To be honest, I find this question the most difficult one to answer, because, of course, always when you talk about the future, one should have open, let's say, open roads, like open options to discuss about. However, in that case, when we start from this point, like your starting point is a famine, is a total devastation of a people's. It's really difficult to imagine how either one single, let's say, binational state would be built, or two states as they thought maybe in the 20th century. It's difficult to envision what would be there. And also, it's not, of course, our call. I mean, it's up to the Palestinians and citizens of Israel to decide on this. We have to be only, good facilitators, good mediators, good, yeah. So a mirror, let's say. So in that case, I would only imagine a more not idealized, but a more maybe romantic picture of a grandfather and the granddaughter I had met in West Bank in Palestine when I visited it in 2009. So it was the very first mission I was part of, but of another kind, like. It was people were more optimistic back then because of Obama governance as well, and we were just taking interviews of people. So I remember them, like the grandfather and the granddaughter was called Palestine, like the name of Palestine, and they were around an olive tree, which is a very strong symbol of Palestine, along with the watermelon. So I would just imagine this, that they have the right and they should be able to hug their trees, not as not as Western activists, but as the first material need, to be able to cover their satisfy the first needs for food, for a house, for housing, so. Yes, so just be able to survive without struggling every day and every hour. And be also happy, because these people are also, they're not only resilient, they really have a genuine joy inside them. I mean, I don't want to idealize them, but because of course not all people are the same, as they're not the same in Greece, but collectively, I mean, they have developed this characteristic, I think, to be able to be happy and cheerful even under very harsh conditions, circumstances. So I would only like to see them free, to be able to be happy, freely, without this weight on them.
Kleo, thank you for sharing both the political and deeply personal sides of this story. It's been an honor to listen to your perspective.
Thank you so much as well.
Make an impact on Europe with PulseZ. Publish European stories, learn journalism, and make your voice heard.